Hey everybody, it's Natalie Bencivenga, and welcome back to Facts Over Fear. This is one of my favorite regular segments with one of my favorite people, Dr. Natalie Gentile. We're going to break down all the health news that you need to know kicking off this week. We got a couple of topics, Dr. G, that are, I'm sure, going to ruffle some feathers, but that's apparently what we do now.
It's our specialty.
Yes, and so I'm going to run them down really quickly. The first one we're going to talk about involves the disabled communities. What happens if community-based care is no longer guaranteed? I posted a video about this. There was a memo that's challenging the status quo. So this is a memo. It's an opinion. It is not a law. People did not watch my video and then told me I didn't know what I was talking about, that the law hadn't changed. I'm like, correct, it hasn't. So this is what we call an erosion and a weakening of laws. So we're going to get into that and what it could mean for so many communities that you as a physician work with on a daily basis. And then we're going to talk a little bit about vaccines. There's been some exciting things coming out around COVID vaccines reducing the rate of stroke and heart attack by 40% in a large sample that they did recently, as well as the HPV vaccine showing promise of basically like eliminating cervical cancer in women and people with uteruses under 30. This is major. So why are we seeing vaccination rates overall dropping? We're seeing measles outbreaks happening. There's a lot of scary stuff going on. So where's the disconnect here? So we're going to talk about that. And then finally, we're going to end on a little trending news right now around peptides. I've been hearing about these over the last few months. I know you've been hearing about them in the news. Some people you know may be using them. What are people using them for? Is it safe? And how do you know what you're getting? So we're going to break down a little bit of that as well. As always, before you make any decisions, talk to your doctor. That's why I'm talking to mine right in front of us. All right. All right. Dr. Gentile, I'm just going to kick us off with the first topic because it's a big one and I think a very important one as well. So this comes from NPR. For decades, disability rights advocates have fought to ensure that people with disabilities can live, work, and play in their own communities while receiving care at home rather than in institutions, which was a thing that happened not in that so distant past. But a recent Department of Justice memo, okay, this is an opinion, memo is raising alarms nationwide after concluding that states are no longer legally required to provide community-based care under federal disability laws. So critics are arguing that this move undermines the foundation of the landmark Olmstead decision, and we can get into that in a little bit, which established that unnecessary institutionalization can constitute discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The court agreed that states have a legal responsibility to provide support that integrates disabled Americans into communities. And for nearly 3 decades, that's all, 3 decades, the courts across the country have embraced this interpretation. So by 2023, 8.4 million Americans were receiving home and community-based services through Medicaid. And I think that's an important component that I did not bring up in yesterday's video because I gave it quick and dirty. But today, I think it's important that we tie in the fact that they're cutting back Medicaid services. And then all of a sudden, this memo, which is a basic, an opinion on the fact that, we shouldn't be required to provide, home-based care. That's, oh no, there you are. Sorry about that. My phone's even so excited about this that you don't even need home-based care as a part of all of this. So let's just get into this and let me just do something really quickly here because I don't want this to break up again. Okay, I apologize, everybody. Dr. G, please take it away.
Well, so I guess I have a couple of questions. You said the Department of Justice?
Yes. Why? I Your guess is as good as mine because I think there's so much happening here that I'm not fully aware of in terms of, once again, why is the Department of Justice intervening around community-based care? And then I started thinking about this more. And I started thinking about how the Department of Justice is really starting to overreach in so many other areas of our lives. If we look at what's going on with immigration, for example, right? And how we're treating people that are here, let's say, with the improper paperwork, who are not criminals, and yet they're being treated as criminals. They're being forced into institutions into detention camps of some kind. They're being forced to labor now. And now we're seeing the Department of Justice, stepping in and saying this about this memo and that they are no longer required to provide care. I don't really understand that, other than it has to do with like a discrimination law.
Yeah. Or does it have anything to do with, people who are living with disabilities are not wartime ready individuals. So what can they offer? And I'm saying this, if I had my Department of Justice hat on, obviously. So that's another thing that initially comes to my mind. So I think that's really, as somebody who has a person with living with a disability in my own family, the idea of having, just taking away healthcare from people living like that is so devastating because it's not just the individual who needs the care, it's also their family who is caregiving as well, right? And the community that's helping to take care of them is impacted as well. So this doesn't just impact one individual. This impacts a community of people who are helping to take care of this individual, So that's an immediate thing I think of.
Yeah.
I also get extremely frustrated when we always say this, like people will be like, well, I don't know why, you as a healthcare worker are talking about politics. Like healthcare is politics. Politics and healthcare are intertwined. And this is yet another example of how we are regularly, especially over the past year and a half, having the rug pulled out from under us left and right when it comes to healthcare and like who deserves it and who doesn't. And I think that can be really exhausting, especially as a person living with disabilities who already is fighting regularly for their rights, for their care, and their access to it.
Absolutely. And to piggyback off of what you were saying, I was listening. It was just, I was skimming the NPR articles. So the part that the Department of Justice, I think where this plays in is that it says it's not clear what the immediate impact of the memo will be, although it seems the Justice Department will stop its enforcement efforts around Olmstead. So Olmstead, and I'm going to pull up my article here. This was in 1999. This was a case testing these protections around disability rights, made it all the way to the Supreme Court. In Olmstead versus LC, two women with mental disabilities sued Georgia, arguing that the state had failed its obligation to provide services that would allow them to return to their communities, and that it had continued to institutionalize the women instead, violating their civil rights. So I think that's where the intertwine of the Justice Department is coming in. So basically the DOJ is saying they're no longer going to support that.
And how do you just put out a memo? And
right.
Who is that supposed? Is this a threat? Is this something that there's actual potential for?
So that's the other part of this. So this is a memo. So this is not a law. That's not how that works. But what it's basically doing is it's an erosion. It's a weakening, right? Because they're no longer taking a position on XYZ. It's very similar to the way RFK is behaving with the CDC. They're changing and shifting their framework around how they're handling an issue. So then it becomes much easier to say, oh, well, the DOJ doesn't support this anymore, so now we're going to implement XYZ.
It opens up gaps that things can slip through.
Exactly. So just to kind of further solidify it, this person is saying in this article around this that we are incredibly concerned, this is from NPR, that this message coming from the federal government in this memo is basically this. It's fine to go back to the days that people were placed in institutions, even though they can be served in the community, even though they want to be, and even though it's more cost effective. So once again, this is a memo. It is not a law. But what it's doing is
precedent.
Exactly. It's opening the door for there to be new ideas to come
because
into
you
play.
Could then say the same thing applies to immigrants. You could say then the same thing applies to those that are dealing with mental health conditions, schizophrenia, bipolar. Where does it end? It sets precedent. Exactly.
And you and I talk a lot about health and I know this is a health news show we do, but we talk about health in the broader scope, that health is a temporary space, just like illness and disability can be permanent and temporary spaces. So what does it mean to be disabled? Because if you break your leg and you're laid up for 6 months, in that full recovery of your leg, you are temporarily disabled. What does that mean? What if you have a chronic condition like rheumatoid arthritis or cerebral palsy or, Parkinson's, and you can live at home But the government now is saying, maybe you can't. Maybe we're going to tell you where you're going to live. Like, do you see how this becomes this slippery slope? And it goes back to what you said earlier. Is this all about productivity and end stage capitalism, right? Like, if you are not a human doing, then we don't think of you as a human being.
Sure. And I think the other thing to discuss here is, we have time and again over decades shown that having services in the home for anything, like keeping people in their home, out of hospitals, out of ERs, out of institutions, can reduce overall spending, helps people recover better, right? Like, if we have that knowledge, and that is important to implement. We do it all the time in primary care. Like, how can I get you home with home health? How can we get you discharged from the hospital, et cetera? So why the shift back? And it is reminiscent of institutionalizing detainees.
Yeah.
It's reminiscent of, like, I think
100%
it that way. And so if you're going to, is there a healthcare savings that they think this is going to lead to? Are insurance companies on board with this kind of thing? Like, there's no forethought.
No. And who's paying for these institutions?
Exactly.
How are they staffing them? Who's going to be like, is this going to be another, we're going to outsource it to the private companies?
Yeah.
Because we know how well that's
excited
going.
about that. Yeah.
Ooh, because I can't help but think this is part of that. We've seen this with nursing care facilities. We've seen this obviously with what we're seeing with the GEO group and others like it that are running the private entities that are running the ICE detention hellholes. And, now we're talking about putting homeless people into camps and spaces. I think on our show a couple months ago, we talked about how RFK wanted to put kids with certain illnesses or drug addiction into camps. Like, what's doing? What is all this? What is this obsession with camps right now? It's weird. And I find it fascinating too, to segue us into the next topic. We've got such an obsession over health, and this government is all about health, right? And they want everybody healthy and working. But then they undermine all the programs and they spread disinformation around all the things that can help us stay healthy and working. And one of those things is vaccinations, which I think is getting a bad rap right now because they are so effective. People don't even realize how effective they are until they're gone. And according to the Hill, the vaccines are among the most successful public health tools we've ever developed, helping eliminate or dramatically reduce diseases that once killed or disabled millions of people. Yet vaccination rates are declining in many communities across the United States, including several right here in our home state of Pennsylvania. Now, this trend is really occurring at a curious moment, Dr. G, because we have new, robust research that is suggesting people who received COVID-19 vaccines are experiencing significantly lower rates of heart attacks and stroke, 40% lower compared to those who remain unvaccinated. 40% is a big number. Meanwhile, the HPV vaccine continues to show remarkable success in preventing cervical cancer, one of the most dangerous cancers you can get if you have a cervix, with studies finding dramatic reductions in cancer diagnoses among vaccinated populations. In fact, kids that were vaccinated at age 12 or 13 against HPV have close to zero risk. I said zero. That's wild. Risk of dying of cervical cancer before the age of 30. This is amazing research. Both of these statistics around COVID and HPV are now being corroborated by more than one study. So this is a big deal. So despite that, vaccine skepticism continues to grow. Can you just share a little from your experience as a primary care physician, what you're seeing and hearing? I know you even posted a video the other day around a doctor who was upset about, or excuse me, a patient that was upset about something. Can you just kind of get into your immediate feelings around this?
Yeah. So immediately, you talk about the dramatic impact that vaccinations have had from a public health perspective. But then if you go into the comment sections when you post about vaccine efficacy or, revolutionary things that have come out from vaccine interventions, you time and time again hear about vaccine injury. Well, I had a vaccine injury. I had a bad experience with the vaccine. And it's interesting because so we're supposed to we're supposed to take your these very offhand experiences, person online, and extrapolate that and say vaccines are bad. Yet we, on the flip side, don't take the dramatic, large number, large scale successes of vaccines and extrapolate that to these things are actually important and successful. That's hypocrisy.
Yes.
And that doesn't make sense.
And bad science.
That's bad. That's not science.
That's not science. Thank you.
Right? Yeah. It's not science. So I think that's interesting. I think time and again, when we are on this show talking, we're talking about that rugged individualism, and a lot of it comes down to like the COVID vaccine mandates ruined my life. Like, I think we hear that a lot. Mandates and that word and being forced to do things, it serves you well to bring up that argument when it comes to vaccines, but it doesn't serve you well when it comes to talking about immigrant health and wellness and people with disabilities, right? Like the hypocrisy, I think, is just time and again. You get to pick and choose what's going to be what and who is going to be the enemy. And in this instance, what we've seen is public health suffering. Yeah.
There should be, we've talked about this before as well. Like, these vaccines don't do anything. Well, guess what? You don't even know what these diseases look like because of vaccines, my friend.
That part.
So that's disturbing. And then the HPV vaccine, that came out when I was in my late teens. And I remember it being, there were studies going on at Pitt when I was at Pitt Med, and some of my male colleagues were getting vaccinated, even though it was primarily something that girls were getting like in the clinic. Boys started to get it, men started to get it as part of like these clinical trials. And then it became now, all of the kiddos that I see in that age range, we're talking about the HPV vaccine. That's remarkable. We're not just talking about cervical cancer either. We're talking about throat cancer. Like, we're talking about the effects that HPV has all over the body, which is scary. Rectal cancer, right? Like, these are things that we can prevent. This is exciting. But I think a lot, especially in the case of HPV, a lot comes down to morality. Well, why does it matter? The only way you're getting HPV is if you're having sex. And so we just
glad you brought
nobody
that up.
is. So is that what we're supposed to just say, like, you're not allowed to? And that, again, it's the purity testing. It's the link back into things like Christian nationalism. We could go on and on and on.
We could. And I would love to, because all of this is so connected. Like, I think that's why I love doing Facts Over Fear, and why I love having, you on as much as I can, as much as you'll stand me having you on, because I love having these conversations with you, because I think it's hard for people to sometimes understand that something that seems like it's way over here and something that seems like it's way over here, it's actually right here. And this is the reality of that, right? When we're talking about white nationalism, when we're talking about fascism and end-stage capitalism, we're also talking about vaccinations. We're also talking about the disabled communities and how we can come together, and how we can also talk about disinformation machine, and how shows like this are so important. So if you're watching this and you find this useful, please, follow us, subscribe to us, but more importantly, share the content, because we're fighting like a huge uphill battle against well-funded, well-oiled bots and misinformation machines. And so, Dr. G, to your point, I so appreciate you being so candid about that, because that was what was floating around in my head, was the morality aspect of this. Nobody wants to admit that their kids are someday going to grow up and have sex. Like, nobody, that's awkward. Like, no parent wants to have these conversations. That's why aunties are great. Let me just say that. That's why stepmoms are great, because we're a step removed. Religious. There are religious things around it too. Which I understand that. I hear that. Right? Like, 100%. I hear all of that. But if we are going to put our children in danger because of that, when we have a way that can help, prevent disease, like, I that's scary.
No, it breaks your heart, because, once again, so much of this is wrapped up in how we look at sexuality, how we look at sexual health. And the more we vilify it or treat it as this scary, dirty thing that we're not supposed to talk about, especially with young girls or self-identified girls, it's disempowering. And so it's not, giving your child an HPV vaccine when they're 12, or giving them condoms when they're 15 or whatever, it's not like you're saying run around and be crazy. It's, hey, I want to have a conversation with you, because these are things that are happening in the world. I want you to make good choices for your own well-being, especially now, we're approaching the fall of Roe. It'll be 4 years tomorrow. People don't have protections like they even did a few years ago. And so this idea, and also it's wrapped up in rape culture. It's wrapped up in consent. So having age appropriate conversations with your children, it's not just about sex. It's about consent. It's about safety. It's about the manosphere getting to them before you get to them.
Yeah. So that's the other part of this, because I think sometimes we do a disservice talking about HPV vaccine and only talking about cervical cancer, because then we put the benefits of the HPV vaccine only on benefiting women. And
we don't like that.
No, we don't like that. Okay.
No.
Like, we have to understand that, because then when we do that, then we put, once again, it all on women. We put it on women and girls, and it's your fault, woman, if you get raped. It's your fault if you end up having sex before marriage, right? Because you brought a man on and tempted them. Like, it is a very slippery slope.
Yes.
And so I think when we talk about HPV in particular, again, as a population level disease, right, that we can prevent, then we take the gender part out of it.
Which is so important. I so appreciate that perspective. So, okay. So we've talked about the disabled community and the impact that, the things that we say can influence decisions at the governmental level. And those things that we say can also impact how people feel about vaccine and how they feel about community care and health. But now we're going to talk about how, because there's so much distrust and mistrust in, our medical system, our community care systems, that people are turning to the internet. They're turning to TikTok. They're turning to AI to understand their own health better, their bodies better. And there's a lot of things that trend because of that. And there's a lot of people willing to sell you products because of that. And Dr. G, you talk about wellness scripting all the time. And so today I wanted to talk about something not under the assumption that it's wrong, but just to understand it better, because it is trending. And I want to make sure we give people the right information around it, which is peptides. So if you've been spending any time on social media lately, this is from NPR as well, you've probably heard influencers, celebrities, and biohackers, it's my new favorite term, talking about peptides. So they're being marketed for everything from weight loss and muscle growth to anti-aging, improved recovery, better sleep, increased energy. My gosh, whatever you want. It sounds like peptides are the solution. But what exactly are they? And are the claims keeping pace with the science? So unlike many traditional medications, some peptide products are being sold through wellness clinics and online providers, often with little or limited oversight. And while certain peptide therapies do have some legitimate medical use, experts warn that others are just being promoted long before there's strong evidence to support their benefits. So, Dr. G, before we get into the why this is happening, can you explain a little bit about what is this? What are peptides, and why are people talking about them all of a sudden?
So peptides are chemical compounds that there are a lot of different types. If you've heard of GLP-1s, Ozempic, for example, those are peptides. So it's a broad category term. Okay. The ones that people, I think, are talking about when they're on social media are some of the peptides that are out there that have claims of like regenerating, your body after injury. People who exercise a lot, it can be really helpful for recovery, anti-aging, longevity. We hear these words all around these certain types of peptides. A lot of times they're in med spas, they're compounded on, online. Wellness scripters love them. Companies are selling them left and right. There is limited to no human data on the majority of these. Okay. So that right there should give you pause. And also, there are some of them that can perpetuate or light a fire under existing cancer if it's in your body. Oh, that's scary. Yeah. So when I hear these conversations, Natalie, the immediate word that comes to my mind is privilege. Because to have a conversation around peptides or not, in should you take them or not, is a conversation of privilege. You know why? First of all, it's financially a lot.
I'm assuming they cost some cash.
Yes, and they're cash, and you're getting them from places that are going to sell them for a pretty penny. It also is the privilege of having access to healthcare in the first place, because to have screenings around how your body is doing, and all the labs that you can get out there to say that in the first place you need help with recovery and longevity is a privilege. Yeah. And it is not the normal American in general who is engaging in these types of things, right? It's just that it's so much in our face on social media. but it truly is a level of privilege that most people aren't even at. And what's interesting is the things that actually work to help from a longevity perspective: eating a plant predominant dietary pattern, moving your body, focusing on sleep, having access to safe water, having access to safe food, having access to safe movement outside of your home. These things and access to healthcare are like the basic bare minimums that we are not hitting the mark on a consistent basis. So to then jump into the sphere of where peptides are the answer and that's all people are seeing is again another distraction. I put this in the bucket of another distraction for now.
No, I appreciate that because, I talk with a lot of people that are doing all the things all the time. And this has become the new buzzword in some of these, groups. And look, like I said, I'm not here we're not trying to judge anybody for doing any of these things. I understand people want to feel good. They want to feel
better. Yeah.
They want to feel better. But once again, it's like we're putting all of our hope in these things instead of putting our, focus on community care through, like you said, why don't we all have access to clean water right here in the United States? I'm talking about right here today. Not everybody has access to clean water. That's one. Why don't we all have access to being able to take walks or be out in nature or be in community? That's two. Like you said, plant predominant food patterns. Why is it so hard to get good quality plant food that is healthy and safe to eat? And why is it
affordable.
so expensive?
Yeah.
Okay. You have so many communities living in food deserts or food apartheid. So we've got that. And then we know social determinants. Having a actual real life relationship with other people is important. That isolation can actually worsen so many medical conditions. These are all, like you said, those baseline. But once again, they take a community to fix. They take a community to correct. And when we go, oh, well, you need to take this supplement or this powder, and if you don't do it, that's your fault. Now you, once again, like you said, Dr. G, at the top of the show, it becomes about rugged individualism. And so we can therefore put the shame and the onus on the person. Oh, you're not healthy because you chose not to do these things. Like you can flip that script, which I think is so detrimental to actually caring for one another and for our own selves. And so I always appreciate you sharing that information.
I think there's an aspect of aesthetic here that we should talk about as well that has seemed to shift over the past several years. Prior to the current administration, when there, was a very, very, very big push for inclusivity of everyone, the aesthetic was diverse, right? The things that we saw, the people in power, the people that were advocated for, the aesthetic was diverse. And now the aesthetic is the same. And it is your body should look a certain way. You should eat these certain things. You should be the certain color. This is the way. We see this in trad wives, for example, trad wife culture. Like that's just one example of it. And so I think peptides are here at a very good time. They're striking while it's hot, these companies that are selling peptides, because these peptides will promise to enforce that aesthetic, to enable that aesthetic that we're told is right. And so again, all of these things are interconnected. And again, it is potentially at the, reduction in safety for human beings. And that's where I get concerned as a primary care doctor.
Yeah. And I think that's really why I wanted to raise this topic. It in no way, like I said, am I trying to shame anybody that wants to do anything that could help them feel better or look better or whatever. But it's more just making sure we're being safe, because
at what cost?
At what cost? Because people are promising a lot of things these days with, just buy it through Amazon, just buy it through my TikTok shop, take this drug, take these peptides, take this magic pill, and you'll feel better. But we don't know what's in these magic pills. And the things that we talk about on this show, like you said, the basics, getting back to the basics, can actually be the things that could really help you over the lifespan, so that you can have a better quality of life. But it's also about voting in people that support community health and community care. And that also means thinking about our environmental regulations as well, because it doesn't mean much if you feel great until you go outside and you're breathing toxic air and drinking toxic water or eating food that's been living in toxic water or soil. So these are all things to think about.
some parting words, like an insight pulse check here, right?
Yes.
That is devoid of judgment, because I think we can all do this, is think of a Venn diagram. And if there's no overlap, like you are looking at things like vaccines, pharmaceutical medications, things that have been tried and trusted, and you have a high level of discernment and concern about what's wrong with them, yet you have none of that discernment. And that Venn diagram does not overlap when it comes to things like peptide supplements and things that wellness grifters have going on out there. Like, we got to bring the same energy, of discernment and concern and questioning, because otherwise that to me is hypocrisy. And in the end could be unsafe for your body.
Amen to that. So that's why Dr. G is always here, you guys. So if you got any questions as we're running down topics, always feel free to share them in the comments, and I will try to get to them, because we do want to promote an environment here where people can ask whatever they want to ask and hopefully get some resolution so that you can have a healthier and happier life. So Dr. G, if people want to learn more about you and the incredible work that you're doing here in Pittsburgh, where can they go?
Thank you. So I'm active at Natalie Gentile MD. That's my website. That's my Substack, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. And I'm over there talking about public health and healthcare in general.
Amazing. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Bye, everybody.